A black businessman walks into a boutique to replace his soiled pants, but the salesman humiliates him in front of everyone by ripping off his pants. Shock sets in when he discovers who his victim was. Subscribe to the channel and right where you see this video from. Jason tightened his tie, glancing one last time at his reflection in the full-length mirror. The sleek white pants, tailored perfectly to his athletic build, gave him the sharp, professional look he needed. Today was no ordinary day. It was a decisive moment for his career. After years of hard work and overcoming countless barriers, Jason, a successful black entrepreneur, had built a thriving business from the ground up. And now he stood on the cusp of expanding his empire, a deal with some of the most influential investors in the city awaiting him. Jason had grown up with very little, in a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce, but he had always dreamed big. Many times, people had underestimated him, looking down on him simply because of his background or the color of his skin. Yet he had persisted, pushing past barriers of prejudice and skepticism with relentless determination. This meeting was more than just a business opportunity. It was his chance to break the mold, to prove that he belonged in the boardroom as much as anyone else. He adjusted his suit jacket and took a steadying breath. There was something about wearing the perfect outfit that brought him a certain confidence. And for this meeting, he wanted everything to be flawless. He knew that he couldn't afford any mistakes, that any tiny flaw in his presentation could be seized upon as an excuse to doubt him. But as he glanced at the clock, he realized he was cutting it close. He needed to grab a quick coffee to shake off the nerves before heading to the meeting room. He mentally rehearsed his pitch as he walked over to the coffee machine, imagining every slide, every point he planned to make. Just as he reached for his cup, a slip of his hand sent a hot stream of coffee spilling down the front of his pristine white pants. The stain spread quickly, the dark liquid soaking into the fabric, leaving an undeniable blotch that disrupted the careful image he had worked so hard to craft. Jason's heart sank as he took in the sight, his mind racing as he tried to process the sudden disaster. Of all days, why did it have to happen today? He scrambled for paper towels, dabbing at the stain, but it was no use. The coffee had already set in. Panic rose within him. There was no time to return home or even try to change in his office. In just over 15 minutes, he was due to present his case to investors, and he couldn't walk in looking like this. He knew he had only one option, the shopping mall nearby. It was the closest place he could find a replacement pair of pants quickly, and, as fate would have it, the mall was a property he himself owned, a part of his expanding business portfolio. As he rushed down the corridor toward the mall entrance, he made a mental note of his time. 10 minutes. If he could get in and out in 5, he might still make it to the meeting on time, albeit a bit flustered. His mind spun with the possibilities, desperately calculating how fast he could make the purchase, change, and head back to the office. He would have to find something simple, something that didn't require a lot of trial and error. A white pair of pants, hopefully close enough in style to match his blazer and shirt. Entering the mall, Jason felt a slight pang of pride. He had worked hard to purchase this property, transforming it from an overlooked retail space into a bustling center. As he moved through the crowd, he nodded to a few familiar faces, including a couple of security guards who gave him a friendly wave. They respected him here, even if some people still had trouble seeing past his race or background. He brushed off any apprehensions, reminding himself that today wasn't about seeking validation. It was about securing the future he had worked so hard to build. He spotted a boutique on the second floor with a display that looked promising. He briskly entered, quickly scanning the racks until he found a pair of pants close to his original pair. Grabbing his size, he headed to the fitting room, determined to move as quickly as possible. Time ticked away as he changed, carefully tucking his shirt in and checking the fit. The pants were snug but decent enough to get him through the meeting. Satisfied, he hurried out of the fitting room, pants in hand, ready to head to the register. As he approached the cashier, a faint sense of relief began to settle over him. He had made it through the first hurdle, and with any luck, he'd be on his way to the office soon, perhaps only a minute or two late. But as he reached the register, the young white cashier eyed him with a look he had seen too many times before, a look of suspicion, one that hinted at doubt and mistrust. "Sir, where are you going with those pants?" The cashier's tone was sharp, accusatory. Jason blinked, momentarily taken aback. "I'm going to pay for them," Jason replied, reaching into his pocket for his wallet. The cashier's gaze remained fixed on him, a hardened expression that told Jason this wouldn't be as simple as he'd hoped. There was a pause, a momentary tension that hung in the air as Jason held out the pants, indicating his intent to pay. But instead of scanning the item, the cashier folded his arms, his eyes narrowing. "Did you already put them on in the fitting room?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Jason's pulse quickened as he registered the distrust in the cashier's voice. He tried to maintain his composure, even as frustration began to bubble beneath the surface. "Yes," Jason replied evenly. "I spilled something on my other pair, and I needed a quick replacement, that's all." But the cashier seemed unconvinced. He glanced around as if searching for support or confirmation, before turning his gaze back to Jason. The young man's posture stiffened, his gaze narrowing further, and his lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Sir, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but I'm going to have to ask you to stay right here while I get security," he said, a barely concealed edge in his voice. Jason felt a surge of indignation but forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time he'd faced baseless accusations, but it was one of the few times it had happened in a place he actually owned. Taking a slow breath, he reminded himself of the importance of his meeting and the time ticking away, but a nagging sense of anger simmered in his mind as he watched the cashier walk away, leaving him standing awkwardly in front of the register, his plans slipping further out of reach with each passing second. Jason stood in front of the cash register, feeling the prickling weight of the stares from other customers around him. What should have been a quick purchase was morphing into something much darker, and Jason could already sense where this was going. He'd been here before, in situations where suspicion fell on him without cause, and it always left him feeling exposed and demeaned. But here, in his own property, in a mall he owned and managed, the insult felt sharper, cutting past any defenses he'd built up over the years. As he waited, Jason tried to catch the eye of the cashier, hoping he'd reconsider or see the absurdity of his actions. But the young man avoided Jason's gaze entirely, instead watching the store entrance with a look of anticipation, likely waiting for security to arrive. Jason's initial frustration was quickly turned into anger as he stood there, holding the pair of pants that had started this whole ordeal. He felt a gnawing awareness that, to some of the people watching, he didn't belong here, at least not in their minds. Within moments, 2 security guards entered, one of them giving Jason a quick, assessing glance before heading over to the cashier. Jason recognized them. He had seen them during his occasional visits to the mall, and they should have recognized him too, but their faces remained impassive as they listened to the cashier's account, their expressions hardening as he spoke in low, urgent tones. The security guards turned their attention to Jason, and he could feel the walls closing in around him. "Sir, we've been informed that there's a situation here," one of the guards said, his tone formal and measured, but there was an unmistakable edge in his voice. "Apparently, there's some issue with the merchandise." Jason resisted the urge to scoff, knowing it would only worsen the situation. "I came here to buy these pants," he explained, keeping his tone steady. "I spilled coffee on mine, and I needed a quick replacement. I was just about to pay when this gentleman," he motioned toward the cashier, "decided to escalate things." The guards exchanged a glance, clearly skeptical. One of them crossed his arms, his gaze hardening as he looked Jason up and down. "We'll need to check the footage and see if everything adds up," the guard said, as if Jason's explanation hadn't registered at all. Jason felt his jaw tighten, a familiar tension building in his chest. He was on a tight schedule with minutes ticking by that he couldn't afford to lose. But here he was, trapped in a situation he'd had no way to prevent. All he wanted was to buy a pair of pants, and yet somehow that simple task had spiraled into an interrogation. And the longer he stood there, the more people gathered around, their whispers and judgmental glances like needles piercing his skin. The second guard spoke up, a hint of impatience in his voice. "Look, we're just trying to do our jobs here, so if you could just cooperate, this will all go smoothly." "Cooperate?" Jason's voice was low, but the strain was evident. "I told you I'm ready to pay. There's no need for any of this." But the guard's expression remained unchanged. "Then you won't mind if we take a look in your pockets just to be sure." Jason's frustration flared into outright anger, but he bit down on the words he wanted to say. The meeting, he reminded himself. He couldn't afford to let this incident spiral out of control. Reluctantly, he emptied his pockets, showing only his wallet and phone, his movements slow and deliberate. The guards watched him with a mix of suspicion and condescension, as if expecting to catch him in some deception. Satisfied, or perhaps disappointed, the guards nodded, and Jason thought that might finally be the end of it. He reached for his wallet, hoping to pay and leave, but the cashier stepped forward, his expression twisted with disdain. "People like you always think you can get away with anything," he muttered, his voice just loud enough for Jason to hear. Jason froze, his hand halfway to his wallet. The words hit him like a slap, a bitter reminder of the ugly biases that lurked just beneath the surface. His grip tightened on the wallet, every instinct screaming at him to walk out, to refuse to tolerate another second of this demeaning charade. But he knew that walking out would only confirm their suspicions in their eyes, and he couldn't allow them that satisfaction. "People like me?" Jason's voice was icy, each word measured. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, that any escalation would only give them more ammunition, but the anger he felt was too sharp to suppress entirely. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" The cashier's face flushed, but he didn't back down. "Look, I know the tricks. I've seen enough people try to pull this kind of stunt thinking they're clever." Jason's restraint was wearing thin. He had no patience left for the cashier's thinly veiled prejudice, but he forced himself to stay composed, to swallow the anger that clawed at his throat. He had spent years building his career, overcoming hurdles and stereotypes, only to be treated like this in his own establishment. But he couldn't risk his reputation. Not here. Not now. "Sir, if you're going to pay, we'd appreciate it if you did so without causing any further issues," one of the guards interjected, as if he were the one making a scene. Jason glanced at his watch, feeling the minutes slipping away. He knew he had no choice. Either he paid and walked out, or he risked a full-blown confrontation. He took out his credit card, but before he could hand it over, the cashier shook his head, a mocking smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Actually, I'm going to need to verify your ID before we proceed," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Jason's jaw clenched, the last remnants of his patience snapping. He had cooperated with every unreasonable demand, endured every insult, but this was too much. He took a deep breath, his gaze locked onto the cashier's, and for a brief moment he considered walking away altogether. But he knew that doing so would leave a stain, one that would follow him even into that meeting room as a reminder of what they believed him to be. Reluctantly, he pulled out his ID, handing it over with a controlled, almost mechanical motion. The cashier studied it for an uncomfortably long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally nodding and processing the payment. Jason snatched his ID and credit card back, fighting the urge to say something that would only escalate the situation further. The transaction complete, he stuffed the pants into a bag and turned to leave, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. He had made it through, but the bitter aftertaste of the experience clung to him, a reminder of the prejudice he'd thought he could escape by rising above. As he exited the store, he felt the weight of the onlookers' gazes still on him, their silent judgments lingering in the air like a shadow. But as he walked out, his head held high, Jason felt a flicker of resolve igniting within him. He had let this slide, had kept his composure for the sake of his career, but he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jason's heart pounded as he made his way out of the boutique, feeling an intense urge to leave the entire experience behind him. He forced himself to focus on the meeting ahead, trying to shake off the humiliation and frustration that clung to him like a second skin. But as he made his way toward the mall exit, he became aware of hurried footsteps behind him. "Hey, hold it right there!" a voice called out, loud enough to make everyone nearby turn and stare. Jason stopped, a feeling of dread settling in his stomach as he recognized the same security guard from earlier. The guard approached him, and a small crowd of curious onlookers began to gather around, their gazes filled with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Jason could feel the heat of embarrassment rising to his face, knowing he was now the center of attention in a place he should have felt safe in, a place he owned. "What now?" Jason asked, struggling to keep his voice calm. The guard didn't bother with an explanation. Instead, he gave Jason a hard look, as if daring him to resist, and then motioned to the pants Jason had just bought. "I don't think you paid for those," the guard stated flatly. Jason blinked, taken aback by the absurdity of the accusation. "I just paid for them," he replied, his voice tight with restrained anger. "You saw me at the register. The cashier took my card." But the guard shook his head, his expression unmoved. "We didn't see any receipt, and until we do, those pants are store property." Jason felt his patience snap, the last thread of composure unraveling under the weight of the guard's accusation. "This is ridiculous. You saw the entire transaction happen. This is a misunderstanding at best and harassment at worst." The guard folded his arms, his posture firm and unyielding. "Look, sir, you're making this harder than it has to be. If you didn't steal anything, then prove it. Show us the receipt." Jason reached into the bag, rifling through it, only to realize that in his haste to get away, he hadn't taken the printed receipt. He felt a wave of frustration wash over him. "I don't have it. The cashier didn't give it to me." The guard's lips twisted into a smug smile. "Convenient, isn't it? You don't have proof, and you expect us to just take your word for it." Jason's fists clenched, the humiliation building up inside him like a storm. Around him, people whispered to each other, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of suspicion and pity. He wanted to shout, to demand that they stop staring, that they stop judging him without knowing the truth. But he knew that any outburst would only confirm their worst assumptions. The guard took a step closer, his voice low but dripping with condescension. "You people are all the same, always thinking you can just walk in and take what you want." Jason froze, his breath catching in his throat. The guard's words echoed in his mind, each one landing like a punch. He'd dealt with prejudice before, had encountered the subtle slights and whispered insults, but this was different. This was open, brazen disrespect, an assault on his dignity that cut straight to his core. Without warning, the guard reached forward, his hands grabbing at the waistband of Jason's pants. Before Jason could react, the guard yanked them down, leaving him standing in the middle of the mall, exposed and humiliated, his underwear visible to everyone around. Gasps and shocked murmurs filled the air as people pulled out their phones, some taking pictures, others recording videos. Jason's mind went blank, a white-hot surge of anger and shame flooding his senses. He felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot as the weight of the humiliation settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He wanted to cover himself, to shout, to disappear, but he could only stand there, frozen in disbelief, as the guard sneered at him. "There," the guard said, his voice mocking, "now everyone can see what you were hiding." Jason finally managed to move, pulling his pants back up with trembling hands. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their gazes heavy with judgment and pity. The guard stepped back, crossing his arms with a look of satisfaction, as if he had just dispensed justice. Jason's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic whirl of anger, shame, and disbelief. He wanted to lash out, to demand accountability for the indignity he'd just suffered, but he knew that any reaction would only fuel the guard's sense of superiority, would only reinforce the image of him as the troublemaker they believed him to be. For a moment, Jason locked eyes with the guard, a silent exchange passing between them. The guard's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty as he realized the depth of Jason's fury. But before Jason could say anything, he heard a voice from the crowd. A woman, her tone laced with disbelief. "Isn't that the owner of this place?" A ripple of realization spread through the crowd, and Jason could see the expressions shifting, their pity turning to shock, their curiosity turning to horror. The guard's face paled as he registered the murmurs, his earlier confidence wavering as he took in the implications of his actions. Jason's gaze never wavered, his eyes boring into the guard's, a silent promise of consequences. He straightened, his movements controlled, his face a mask of cold determination. The whispers around him grew louder, people pointing and whispering, the shock of what had just happened sinking in. The guard's bravado crumbled as he looked from Jason to the crowd, realizing too late the gravity of his mistake. Jason took a slow, deliberate step forward, his voice low and steady, laced with a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs around them. "You've just made the worst mistake of your life," Jason said, his tone deadly calm. The guard swallowed, his confidence shattered as he tried to stammer out an apology, but Jason was already turning away, his mind focused on the next steps. This wasn't over. He would make sure of that. As he walked away, he could feel the weight of the crowd's stares, but this time he didn't care. The humiliation was still fresh, the anger still burning hot, but underneath it all, a new resolve was taking shape. He had endured enough. Now it was time to act. Jason's entire body felt electrified with anger as he strode back to his office. He replayed the incident in his mind, each moment sharp and painful. But underneath the sting of humiliation lay a steady, unbreakable resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about dismantling a system that allowed such treatment to go unchecked. He entered his office building and instructed his assistant to gather the mall's management team and the security staff involved in the incident. Word had already spread, and his assistant's eyes widened with a mixture of sympathy and shock, understanding without words that this wasn't just a typical business matter. Within an hour, everyone involved was seated in the conference room, nervously shifting in their seats as they sensed the gravity of the meeting. Jason entered last, his demeanor cool but intense, the air thick with unspoken tension as he took his place at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his tone calm but carrying a weight that made everyone sit up a little straighter. "As some of you may know, I had a situation in the mall today." A murmur of recognition swept through the room, and Jason saw the security guards exchange anxious glances. He recognized one of them as the guard who had humiliated him, now visibly uncomfortable under Jason's gaze. "I own this mall," Jason continued, "and I've worked hard to make it a place where anyone should feel welcome. But today, that principle was shattered. I was subjected to an act of baseless humiliation, an act rooted in prejudice and disrespect, and I'm here to ensure that it never happens again, to me or anyone else." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Jason fixed his gaze on the head of security, a man named Thompson, who had been in charge of training the guards and setting the standards for how security should interact with customers. "Mr. Thompson," Jason said, his voice measured, "I'd like an explanation for why a customer, let alone the owner, was publicly humiliated without cause. How is it possible that such an incident could occur under your leadership?" Thompson shifted in his seat, his face flushing as he fumbled for words. "Mr. Jason, I wasn't aware of the specifics until just now, but I assure you this isn't standard procedure. We value all our customers and treat them with respect." Jason leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Respect? What I experienced was anything but respectful. Your guard made assumptions, acted aggressively, and turned a simple situation into a public spectacle. Tell me, Thompson, is this what you consider respectful treatment?" Thompson's face turned pale as he stammered, "No, sir, of course not. I'll see to it that the guard responsible is disciplined." "Disciplined?" Jason's voice sharpened. "This isn't just about one guard. This is about the culture you've allowed to flourish under your supervision. Discipline won't fix a problem this deep." Jason's words hung in the air and the security guards looked down, avoiding his gaze. But Jason wasn't finished. He turned his attention to the young guard who had stripped him of his dignity along with his clothing. The guard's face now drained of color as he realized the full extent of the consequences he was facing. "What's your name?" Jason asked, his voice calm but unyielding. The guard swallowed hard. Matthew, sir." "Matthew," Jason repeated, his tone steady. "Do you have any idea of the harm you caused today? Any understanding of what you did?" Matthew's gaze fell, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was just doing my job, sir." "Your job?" Jason's voice was sharp with incredulity. "Your job is to keep the mall safe, not to harass innocent customers, and certainly not to strip a person of their dignity in front of everyone. The other managers and staff members shifted uncomfortably, the reality of the situation sinking in as Jason continued. "I want every person in this room to understand something," Jason said, his voice calm but laced with iron. "No one in this mall will ever be treated like I was today. Not because of their race, their background, or any other superficial judgment. As long as I'm in charge, this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." He took a steadying breath, his gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the expressions of those who were still struggling to process the gravity of his words. "Effective immediately. I want a complete review of our security practices and policies. Every guard in this building will undergo mandatory sensitivity and anti-discrimination training. And to ensure this message is clear, I'm terminating anyone directly involved in today's incident, including you, Matthew." Matthew's face went white, his mouth opening as if to protest, but he quickly closed it, realizing the futility of any defense. He cast his eyes downward, his hands trembling slightly as he absorbed the weight of Jason's decision. Jason shifted his attention back to Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, I'm putting you on notice as well. If I see even a hint of discriminatory behavior in this mall again, you will be the next one out the door. Understood?" Thompson nodded stiffly, unable to meet Jason's gaze. "Understood, sir." Jason let the silence linger, the gravity of the moment sinking in for everyone present. This was more than a disciplinary action. It was a statement, a line in the sand. He wanted everyone in the room to remember this moment, to understand that things would be different from now on. As the meeting concluded, the staff members filed out, casting wary glances at Jason, knowing that this was a turning point. Jason remained seated, letting the adrenaline drain from his body as he considered his next steps. This incident, though painful, had given him a new sense of purpose. He wasn't content to simply enforce policies. He wanted to create meaningful change, to dismantle the prejudices that allowed incidents like this to occur in the first place. Alone in the conference room, Jason picked up his phone and began to make a series of calls. He contacted a legal consultant to draft new policies and reached out to organizations specializing in anti-discrimination training. He wanted this change to be more than surface level. He wanted it to reach the core of the mall's culture. This was about more than his own experience. It was about protecting others who might face similar treatment, about ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he had. And as he made his final call, a sense of resolve settled over him. He would build something better, something that would serve as a testament to the values he believed in. Today had marked a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone who would walk through the doors of his mall from this day forward. The following days brought a whirlwind of change as Jason set into motion his vision for a more inclusive and just environment. The mall was buzzing with new energy, not just because of the recent incident, but because of the swift and decisive actions he was taking to reshape the culture within his property. He knew that addressing this issue wouldn't just mean changing policies. It required building something transformative that would serve as a beacon for others. Jason spent long hours researching, speaking with experts, and drafting the framework for what he began to call the Project of Hope. He envisioned it as a multifaceted initiative to provide support, advocacy, and resources for Black individuals and other marginalized communities facing discrimination. He knew it was ambitious, but he also knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about preventing future incidents. It was about creating a legacy that would stand as a testament to the fight against prejudice. The first step was to overhaul the mall's policies and training. Jason brought in a team of consultants who specialized in anti-discrimination practices and sensitivity training. They conducted workshops with the entire staff, from security guards to management, addressing unconscious biases, cultural awareness, and the importance of respectful interactions with all patrons. Jason himself attended the sessions, leading by example and demonstrating his commitment to this change. His presence had a powerful effect, inspiring staff members to take the training seriously, to reflect on their own biases, and to commit to a new standard of respect and empathy. The second phase of the project focused on establishing a dedicated support program within the mall. Jason created a position for an equity liaison, a staff member trained specifically to handle cases of discrimination, harassment, or any issues that might arise between employees and customers. The liaison would act as an advocate, ensuring that incidents were dealt with fairly and without prejudice. Jason wanted to give customers and staff alike a sense of security, a promise that they would be heard and protected if they faced unjust treatment. Beyond the immediate changes within the mall, Jason's vision for the Project of Hope expanded. He began partnering with local organizations that worked to uplift Black communities and support individuals facing systemic barriers. He reached out to nonprofit groups offering scholarships, mentorship programs, and professional development opportunities. He wanted to empower young people, to give them the tools and support they needed to succeed, to break free from the limitations that society had placed on them. Jason knew that real change extended beyond his mall and into the broader community, and he was determined to contribute to that. One afternoon, as he reviewed the progress of the project, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The painful experience he'd endured had ignited something powerful within him, a drive to make a difference not just for himself, but for others. He knew that many people faced prejudice daily, often without the resources or support to fight back. But with the Project of Hope, he could offer them a lifeline, a network of support that would stand beside them, reminding them that they didn't have to endure it alone. The project attracted media attention, and soon news outlets were covering the story. Interviews and articles highlighted Jason's determination to turn a moment of humiliation into a catalyst for change. He spoke openly about his experiences, his voice unwavering as he described the impact that discrimination had on individuals, and how his project aimed to counteract that. Public reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with people praising his courage and resolve. But as much as he appreciated the support, Jason remained focused on his mission. He was in this for the long haul, for the people who would walk through the doors of his mall or into the world carrying scars from similar experiences. He knew that discrimination wasn't something that could be erased overnight, but he was committed to chipping away at it, to creating a safer, more equitable environment one step at a time. In the weeks that followed, Jason saw the effects of his efforts begin to take root. Employees treated each other with newfound respect. Customers remarked on the positive atmosphere, and his team reported fewer incidents of conflict. The equity liaison position quickly became an integral part of the mall's operations, with staff and customers alike feeling more secure knowing that someone was there to listen and to advocate for them if needed. As a final touch, Jason organized a community event at the mall to celebrate the launch of the Project of Hope. He invited speakers, activists, and leaders from various backgrounds to share their stories and discuss the importance of empathy, justice, and equality. The event was a powerful testament to the strength of community, to the idea that change was possible when people came together for a common cause. Looking out over the crowd that had gathered for the event, Jason felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was more than he had ever imagined it could be. What had started as a personal ordeal had grown into something far greater, something that had the power to impact countless lives. He knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but he was ready for them. This project, this movement, it was his answer to the world that had tried to diminish him, to the people who had looked at him and seen only their biases. As the event drew to a close, Jason took the stage, addressing the crowd with a quiet but powerful conviction. "Today is just the beginning," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "The Project of Hope isn't just about preventing discrimination here in this mall. It's about creating opportunities, support, and understanding for everyone who has ever felt like they didn't belong. We're not here to change minds. We're here to build a future where those minds are already open, where respect and dignity are given freely to everyone." The audience erupted into applause, their faces filled with admiration and hope. Jason looked out over them, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. This was more than he had ever dreamed he could accomplish, and he knew that together they could make a real, lasting difference. From that day forward, the mall became known as a place of inclusion, a symbol of resistance against discrimination and prejudice. Jason's Project of Hope stood as a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even the harshest experiences could lead to profound change. And as he looked ahead, he knew that this was only the beginning. The work was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next, ready to continue building a future defined not by division but by unity and respect. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the new stories we have in store for you. Watch other videos to learn more about people, their struggles, and inspiring moments. Your support helps us share important stories, so stay tuned and be part of our community.